If you watched part one of this series, you already know that many of the things dogs do every day aren't random at all. Tilting their heads, running around after a bath, hiding a favorite chew beneath a blanket. Once you understood the reason behind those behaviors, they suddenly started making perfect sense. But while researching this topic, I kept running into something surprising. Some of the most misunderstood dog behaviors weren't happening at home. They were happening outside, during walks, in the backyard, or in places where owners were often too impatient to stop and watch. Your dog suddenly spins in circles before going to the bathroom, stops for what feels like forever to sniff one tiny patch of grass, scratches the ground with incredible enthusiasm after they're finished, freezes in the middle of a walk for no obvious reason, or suddenly becomes completely fascinated by a tiny mouse disappearing into the bushes. To us, these moments often seem slow, unimportant, or simply inconvenient, but to your dog, some of these may be the most information rich moments of the entire day. Because dogs don't experience a walk the same way we do. For us, a walk is usually about exercise, fresh air, getting from one place to another. For your dog, it's something completely different. It's an opportunity to collect information, to investigate, to communicate, to make decisions. And perhaps that's why dogs are often in no hurry at all. The world they're walking through is constantly changing. Every scent tells part of a story. Every patch of grass may contain information left behind by another animal. Every pause has a purpose. Today, we're going to explore some of the outdoor behaviors that owners misunderstand most often. And by the end of this video, you may never rush your dog through another walk in quite the same way again. Let's start with a habit that almost every dog owner has noticed: the circles before going to the bathroom. Sometimes your dog turns once, sometimes twice. Some dogs seem to spin 4 or 5 times before finally choosing a spot. Others walk away, circle again, stop, change direction, and repeat the entire process. If you're standing there holding the leash, it can feel as though your dog simply can't make up their mind. But choosing a place to eliminate isn't nearly as simple as it looks. To us, it's just a piece of grass. To your dog, it's a place filled with information. Dogs rely heavily on scent. Long before they decide where to leave their own scent behind, they often investigate the scents that are already there. Who has been here? How recently? Was it another dog, a male, a female, a familiar individual, or a complete stranger? The decision isn't only about relieving themselves. It's also about choosing where to leave information for the next visitor. The surface matters too. Some dogs clearly prefer grass, others choose dirt, some avoid wet ground, others seem to seek it out. Even wind direction, noise, or nearby movement can influence where a dog finally decides to stop. And then there's a theory you've probably heard before: the idea that dogs circle because they're aligning themselves with Earth's magnetic field. Several years ago, this idea attracted enormous attention around the world. One study suggested that under certain conditions, some dogs appeared to prefer aligning their bodies roughly along the north-south axis while eliminating. The finding was fascinating. It was reported by newspapers across the world, and many people quickly accepted it as the explanation. But science rarely stops after the first interesting result. Later research hasn't consistently reproduced those findings. Today, most behavior experts consider the magnetic field hypothesis an interesting possibility, not a proven explanation, and that's an important distinction. It's perfectly fine to be curious about ideas that science is still exploring. What's less helpful is treating an interesting hypothesis as though it's already a settled fact. What we do know with much greater confidence is that dogs spend this time gathering information through scent, evaluating their surroundings, and choosing where to leave information of their own. So the next time your dog spends an extra 30 seconds searching for the perfect spot, they probably aren't being stubborn. They're making a decision using information we can't even perceive. And once you understand that, those little circles begin to look much less like hesitation and much more like careful planning. And if you've ever wondered why a simple walk can take so long, the next behavior explains it perfectly. You're walking down the same street you've taken hundreds of times before. You already know where you're going. But your dog suddenly stops. They lower their nose to one tiny patch of grass, or a single tree, or a fire hydrant. 10 seconds pass, then 20, sometimes nearly a full minute. Meanwhile, you can't smell anything unusual at all. To us, it looks as though the dog has become distracted by absolutely nothing. But for your dog, that tiny patch of ground may contain an incredible amount of information. People often compare this behavior to reading social media. It's a useful comparison, but it doesn't quite capture what's really happening. Imagine walking into a room where every person who visited before you left a note, not just their name, but where they had been, roughly when they were there, whether they felt calm or excited, and sometimes even whether they were healthy. Now imagine being able to read all of those messages simply by breathing in. That's much closer to the world your dog experiences. A dog's sense of smell is extraordinary. While humans experience the world primarily through vision, dogs build much of their understanding through scent. Every walk becomes an opportunity to gather information that simply doesn't exist for us. Another dog passed this way earlier today. A squirrel crossed the path. A fox moved through the area overnight. Someone's pet was here yesterday evening. To us, it's just grass. To your dog, it's an ever-changing map of the neighborhood. And dogs don't only collect information, they leave it behind as well. Every time your dog urinates, they're doing far more than emptying their bladder. They're also leaving chemical signals that other dogs can investigate later. Research into canine chemical communication has shown that scent plays a central role in how dogs gather social information. Without seeing another dog, without hearing a sound, they may still learn a surprising amount through scent alone. That's one reason why some dogs appear almost obsessed with certain places. They're not smelling one thing. They're sorting through layers of information left by many different animals over time. Imagine reading dozens of overlapping messages written on the same page. That takes time, and your dog isn't rushing because, from their perspective, there's no reason to. Sometimes owners become frustrated. They gently pull on the leash, say, "Come on," or encourage the dog to keep moving. Of course, there are moments when we genuinely need to continue our walk, but understanding what's happening changes the way we see those pauses. Instead of thinking, "My dog is wasting time," we begin realizing, "My dog is gathering information." It's one of the reasons many behavior professionals encourage allowing dogs opportunities to sniff during walks, whenever it's practical and safe. For dogs, sniffing isn't simply entertainment. It's part of how they experience the world. It's exploration, learning, decision making, communication. In many ways, a walk without enough opportunities to sniff would be a little like taking a person through an art museum while asking them not to look at the paintings. The exercise would still happen, but one of the richest parts of the experience would be missing. We've already explored two behaviors that happen before a dog makes a decision: choosing where to eliminate, choosing which scents deserve attention. Different situations, the same underlying idea. Dogs spend far more time gathering information than most of us ever realize. And once you begin noticing that pattern, many outdoor behaviors start making much more sense. But the next one surprises people even more. Because after all that careful investigation, many dogs suddenly do something that looks completely unnecessary. They scratch the ground with incredible enthusiasm, sending grass and dirt flying in every direction. Have you ever watched your dog finish going to the bathroom, only to suddenly kick the ground behind them with incredible enthusiasm? Grass flies through the air. Dirt scatters in every direction. Sometimes they scratch with one back leg, sometimes both. Some dogs barely do it at all. Others seem determined to redesign your entire lawn before they're finished. Most owners assume they're trying to bury what they just left behind. It's a reasonable guess. After all, cats bury. Many other animals bury, so dogs must be doing the same thing, except they usually aren't. If you've watched closely, you've probably noticed something interesting. Dogs often kick away from the spot, not over it. In many cases, they aren't covering anything at all. So why do they do it? One important clue is hidden in a part of the body we rarely think about. Dogs have scent glands not only around the anal area, but also between the pads of their feet. Every scrape against the ground may leave behind tiny amounts of scent. At the same time, the dramatic movement throws grass, soil, and visual debris into the surrounding area. In other words, the scratching itself may become part of the message. Researchers studying canine communication believe these behaviors may help dogs advertise their presence to others. It's a combination of scent, movement, and visual disturbance, a kind of announcement that says, someone was here. Of course, not every dog scratches after eliminating. Some never do, others only do it in certain places. Just as we've seen throughout this series, uh, individual differences matter, personality matters, environment matters, experience matters. But once again, the behavior isn't nearly as random as it first appears. Your dog isn't throwing dirt because they're trying to make your life difficult. They're participating in a communication system that existed long before dogs ever lived beside humans. And that leads us to another behavior that owners often misunderstand. Imagine you're enjoying a perfectly normal walk. Everything is going smoothly. Then, without warning, your dog stops, not to sniff, not to go to the bathroom. They simply freeze. One paw may remain lifted in the air, their ears shift forward, their body becomes completely still. You gently encourage them to keep walking. Nothing. You tug on the leash, still nothing. Many owners immediately assume the dog is being stubborn or refusing to listen. But from the dog's perspective, something very different may be happening. Dogs constantly scan their surroundings, even while walking. Their ears are collecting sounds, their nose is sampling the air, their eyes are tracking movement. Most of this happens so naturally that we never notice it. But every now and then, something captures their attention strongly enough that everything else briefly stops. Perhaps they heard a sound too quiet for us to notice. Perhaps the wind carried an unfamiliar scent. Perhaps they caught movement in the distance. Or perhaps they're simply taking a moment to process several pieces of information before deciding what to do next. That's an important word. Deciding. Because freezing isn't always about fear. Sometimes it's about evaluation. Watch experienced hunting breeds in the field. Many will pause completely before moving again. That moment of stillness allows them to gather more information before making the next decision. Even dogs that have never hunted can show small pieces of this inherited behavioral pattern. Of course, freezing doesn't always have the same meaning. A dog who freezes because they've noticed a squirrel is very different from a dog who freezes because they're frightened. Body language tells the rest of the story. A relaxed body, soft muscles, and quiet curiosity paint one picture. A lowered posture, a tucked tail, or obvious tension tells another. This is why looking at one behavior in isolation can be misleading. The same action, standing perfectly still, can have completely different meanings depending on everything happening around it. That's one of the reasons dog behavior is so fascinating. The answer is almost never found in a single movement. It's found in the whole picture. We've now looked at 4 different outdoor behaviors. At first glance, they seem completely unrelated. Circling, sniffing, scratching, freezing, but they all share something surprisingly similar. Each one happens before your dog makes a decision. Where to leave information, what information to collect, whether to communicate, whether to move forward. Dogs often spend far more time evaluating the world than we realize, and perhaps that's why what looks like hesitation to us is often thoughtful decision making to them. But the next behaviors take us even deeper, because sometimes dogs suddenly reveal instincts that have survived for thousands of years, even though they've never needed to use them. One of the most surprising moments on a walk can happen in complete silence. Your dog is calmly exploring the grass, sniffing, wandering, when suddenly they become completely focused on something almost invisible. Perhaps it's a tiny mouse disappearing beneath a pile of leaves, a lizard darting across a rock, a mole moving beneath the ground, or the faint rustle of something hiding in the bushes. In an instant, your dog's entire body changes. Their ears point forward. Their breathing slows, their eyes lock onto one tiny spot. Sometimes they crouch, sometimes they freeze, sometimes they begin moving with incredible patience, one careful step at a time. If the opportunity disappears, they may spend several more minutes searching for it. Owners often laugh and say, "What are you doing?" There's nothing there. But to your dog, there's almost certainly something there. And what you're seeing isn't a behavior they learned from another dog. It isn't something you accidentally taught. In many cases, it's an instinct that has been quietly waiting beneath the surface all along. Every dog, regardless of breed, still carries pieces of their evolutionary history. Some breeds were later selected to strengthen certain hunting behaviors. Pointers were encouraged to freeze and indicate prey. Retrievers were selected to carry objects gently. Terriers became remarkably skilled at locating small animals underground. Hounds developed extraordinary scent tracking abilities. But the building blocks of those behaviors existed long before those breeds were created. That's why even a dog that has never hunted, never lived outside, and has spent their entire life sleeping on a comfortable sofa may suddenly display astonishing hunting behavior. They're not imagining prey. They're responding to movement, sound, or scent that activates deeply rooted instinctive patterns. Interestingly, not every dog completes the same sequence. Some notice movement and immediately lose interest. Others become intensely focused but never chase. Some stalk quietly, others pounce. Behavior specialists often describe predatory behavior as a chain of actions: orient, eye, stalk, chase, grab. Different breeds have been selectively bred to emphasize different parts of that chain while reducing others. That's one reason a border collie may intensely stalk moving objects without ever intending to catch them. A pointer may freeze almost like a statue. A terrier may begin digging furiously. Different dogs, different expressions, the same ancient foundation. Understanding this changes something important. When your dog suddenly becomes fascinated by a tiny animal, they aren't necessarily being disobedient. They're responding to behavioral patterns that humans have shaped and preserved for hundreds or even thousands of years. Of course, that doesn't mean we allow dogs to chase wildlife whenever they want. Safety always comes first. Reliable recall, leashes where required, respect for local wildlife. Those responsibilities remain ours. But understanding the instinct changes how we interpret the behavior. Instead of seeing a dog that is suddenly ignoring us, we see an animal responding to one of the oldest behavioral systems they possess. And perhaps that's exactly why these moments can seem so powerful. For just a few seconds, the modern family dog disappears, and we catch a glimpse of an ancient animal whose ancestors survived by paying attention to exactly these kinds of opportunities. The final behavior in today's video may be the strangest of them all, and once you've seen it, you'll probably never forget it. Have you ever noticed a small dog lifting both back legs off the ground while urinating, almost balancing on their front legs? Some dogs lean against a tree. Some perform what looks like a tiny handstand. Others seem to compete to reach the highest possible point. If you've never seen it before, it almost looks impossible, and naturally, owners wonder why. At first glance, it seems unnecessary. After all, most dogs don't urinate this way. So why do some of them do it? One possible explanation comes from something we've already talked about throughout this series: communication. Urine isn't only waste. For dogs, it's also information. The height, location, and placement of a scent mark may influence how easily other dogs discover it. Behavior researchers have observed that some smaller dogs appear to use exaggerated postures that allow them to place urine higher on vertical surfaces than would otherwise be possible. Exactly why individual dogs choose these postures is still being studied. There isn't one accepted explanation that fits every dog. Some researchers have suggested that higher scent marks may remain detectable for longer or be more noticeable to other dogs. Others believe body structure, balance, experience, or simple individual preference may also play important roles. The important point is this: not every unusual behavior has one simple answer. Sometimes science gives us a clear explanation, sometimes it gives us several good possibilities, and sometimes the most honest answer is we're still learning. Surprisingly, that's one of the things that makes studying dogs so fascinating. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from both videos in this series so far. The more we learn about dogs, the more we realize how much is happening beneath the surface. A pause that looks like hesitation may actually be careful decision making. A long sniff may be a conversation. Scratching the ground may be communication. Freezing may be observation. A sudden hunting posture may be an instinct that has survived for thousands of years. Even an unusual way of urinating may be part of a communication system we're only beginning to understand. None of these behaviors exist in isolation. They all tell us the same thing. Dogs are constantly collecting information, constantly evaluating their surroundings, constantly making decisions based on a world that is almost entirely invisible to us. Perhaps that's why walks are so important. Many people think a walk is simply exercise, a way to burn energy, a bathroom break. But for your dog, it's much more than that. It's their newspaper, their neighborhood meeting, their investigation, their opportunity to gather information that shapes how they understand the world. When we rush every sniff, pull on the leash every time they stop, or become impatient whenever they pause to investigate, we may be asking them to skip one of the most meaningful parts of their day. Of course, life doesn't always allow us unlimited time. Sometimes we have appointments, sometimes the weather is terrible, and sometimes we simply need to get home. There's nothing wrong with that. But even giving your dog a few extra moments to explore can completely change the quality of their walk. Because to a dog, a successful walk isn't measured only by distance, it's measured by discovery. And once you begin looking at walks through your dog's perspective, they stop feeling like slow, frustrating interruptions. They become opportunities to watch your dog doing exactly what dogs have always done: learning, observing, communicating, deciding. Perhaps that's why the more we understand dogs, the more patient we become. Not because dogs change, because we do. We begin replacing frustration with curiosity. Instead of asking, why won't my dog just keep walking? We begin asking, what has my dog discovered that I can't see? That single question changes everything. Because once you realize your dog experiences a world that exists largely beyond human senses, their behavior begins to make remarkable sense. And we've only explored a small part of that world. While researching this series, I discovered even more fascinating behaviors that deserve their own conversation. Some look completely harmless, yet can mean something very important. Others seem ordinary until you understand what they might actually be telling you. That's exactly where we're going in part 3. We'll explore behaviors that owners see almost every day, but rarely recognize as meaningful. Some are completely normal, some deserve a closer look, and learning the difference may completely change the way you understand your dog. Until then, the next time your dog stops, sniffs, freezes, or spends far longer investigating the world than you think they should, try waiting for just a few extra seconds. You may not see what your dog sees, you may not smell what your dog smells, but you might begin to understand why they're so fascinated. And that's often the first step toward understanding your dog a little better every single day.